Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm John Miller, founding attorney at Rock Solid Law, and I hadn't realized how long it had been that we had taught a course on Homestead until I began preparing for this session and realized it'd been well over a year. And what made me wonder about how long it had been was how very many people signed up to spend this half an hour with us. You know, people throw homestead around all the time and homesteading and all that sort of thing. Well, it has multiple reasons, multiple definitions, and we're going to go over the most important ones in the next little bit. It's going to be a lot of information, but hang around to the end and I will tell you how you can get a memo that is a quick refresher for you should you want to discuss it. Oh, for instance, if you're a realtor with your clients or somebody else who just wants to be able to speak intelligently on the subject, or perhaps for your own use. So I am not a native born Floridian, but I grew up in St. Petersburg, moved here when I was 5 years old, and have now lived in Florida more than 45 years. So candidly, alligators, mosquitoes, and even our state bird, the cockroach, just kidding, it's the mockingbird, I know, are not too weird for me. I married a girl who is from the Northeast and grew up in the Midwest, and I consider that she has an unnatural respect for alligators. Maybe fear is the correct word. Of course, we have small children, as those of you that know me know, and we of course, want to keep them safe. So there's lots of reasons to dislike Florida, right? But there's lots of reasons to like Florida. Most of you know that in addition to estate planning and representing small business owners, we here at Rock Solid Law do real estate work. And oh boy, is that world busy right now. I think a large portion of the Northeast as well as the Midwest have chosen the pandemic as the time that they're finally going to move to Florida. But if you think back before electricity and particularly before air conditioning, Florida may have been a pretty miserable place to try to make a living, right? Those reasons I said before: cockroaches, mosquitoes, alligators, hot July, August, September, summer season, rainy times, mold. Think about 150 years ago, even 175 years ago, what it must have been like to want to live in Florida. So the people down here, Floridians, even before we were a state, wanted to attract settlers to our state. They wanted people to come to Florida and prosper. Well, typically when there is new land to be settled, the mindset is, yeah, let's go there and stake a claim and make something of it. And particularly that's the mindset of a man who may have come to this country with very little and wanted to go, and I'm talking, ladies, 175 years ago, right, when these immigrants were newly come from the old world and wanting to make it. And maybe they've met a girl and they said, can you imagine the conversation? Honey, I want to go down to a mosquito swamp and have a farm or do whatever business they thought they were going to do. Well, all these years later, we know living in Florida is paradise, but back then it had to be a scary proposition. And I imagine in many households, the wiser, more level-headed female member of the partnership may have said, heck no, we're not going down there. It's going to be awful. And what if you lose everything? Me and the kids are not going to have anywhere to live. So imagine how well that conversation played out in multiple scenarios and how that perplexed those early founders in what would become the state of Florida. So they came up with an idea, and that idea was called Homestead. And basically the idea was to allow that, let's call him entrepreneurial man, to relocate his family to our alligator swamp, swampland in Florida. Y'all have heard that phrase your whole lives. I know you have. That's what A lot of was sold to people who'd never set eyes on it. Nowadays, that land's pretty darn valuable. But anyway, they said, okay, entrepreneurial person, come down here, bring your wife, bring your kids. And no matter how bad a business person you are, no matter how bad you crash and burn, we're not going to let you lose your house. So now the conversation of those households went, but honey, I can go down, I can build us a cabin. And no matter how badly you think I'm going to mess up, you and the kids are going to have a place to live if I lose everything, right? So this is the genesis of the idea of Florida Homestead. And from that day to this, it has grown and expanded. So keep that in mind. They were originally trying to attract settlers. And as you know, these days, anybody that's paying attention to the news, we're having new settlers every single day. I believe the number is 7,000 new people coming to Florida every day. Those of us that have been here, in my case, 45 plus years, welcome them on one hand, and then are not so happy when we're trying to run a quick errand during the lunch hour out on A1A. That's an aside. So homestead under Florida law has at least 3 primary definitions, and that often leads to a lot of confusion, right? Because one word means multiple things. Well, y'all know the English language does that all the time, right? So historically, homestead in Florida was granted to provide 2 important protections to settlers in the Civil War era and afterward. First, to prevent the forced sale by creditors. All right, that's what I was talking about. If the entrepreneurial efforts of the head of household failed, the house would be shielded, or in my line of business, we say asset protected from creditors, not all creditors, and we're going to get to some of the specifics in a moment, but from creditors. And second, as I have already referenced, to provide a surviving spouse, usually a wife, and family with shelter and a place to live. So first, the house can't be lost even during the lifetime of that settler. And if the husband or wife had passed away, the family would still get to keep the house. And that has continued on to this day. We'll touch on that a little bit later. So Florida became a state in 1845. As I mentioned, the days before air conditioning, before electricity. I imagine I probably wouldn't have loved living here in the summer months at that point in time. And it was to encourage pioneers to come south rather than go west. And if the head of the household failed, at least the family would have a home. This was codified by the U.S. Congress in the Florida Homestead Act of 1862. So Florida's love affair with homestead was further codified when Section 7 was added to Article 10 of the Florida Constitution on November 6, 1934. Now think about that. Homestead is a part of our Constitution. To get that changed, literally will take an act of Congress, right? And in fact, it's more difficult than that these days. So the Constitution is going to protect Florida homestead, and I believe that it will stay in effect in Florida forever. The Supreme Court of Florida considers Florida's homestead constitutional law to be, and I quote, the greatest benevolence ever shown by the people of any state toward the exemption of homestead from taxation. We got it good. Realtors, you listening to me? We have the greatest benevolence ever shown to the people of any state with regard to taxation. I know people are wanting to buy Florida homes, but there's another good reason to do so. Secondly, the property cannot be transferred without both spouses signing off. I have people argue with me all the time, but it's just in my name. I owned it before we were married. I have practiced real estate law since 1991, practiced law since 1985, and I'm telling you, people make this same argument with different words probably every single month that I've practiced. I had an interesting one recently. A married couple, and they have a home here and a home in Georgia. The home here is his homestead. The home in Georgia is her homestead. I was thinking, well, if she has a homestead somewhere else, doesn't that mean she doesn't need to sign on his homestead here? Took it all the way up to underwriting counsel from my title company. We had a great discussion, and he reminded me just how irrelevant that Georgia homestead is. Because they were married and because it is his homestead here in Florida, she had to sign in order to refinance that property and therefore reduce their interest rate. So the protection there is that one spouse can't slip out and sign the property out from under the other one. You know, we know that a lot of people do split up, especially in this era, and that there are times when one of the spouses feels more entitled to the homestead than the other, and they try to take control of it without the other. I will tell you, in case you're wondering the thrills and spills of being a title attorney, that this story goes back to the 90s, thankfully. We actually had a man come in to our office with a woman that he introduced as his wife, and she bore a vague resemblance to the person on the driver's license they presented, which was the driver's license of his wife, but not enough. And we were suspicious, and we asked for additional identification, which this lady was unable to provide. And the reason she was unable to provide it was he was trying to defraud us and defraud his soon-to-be ex-wife and sell that property right out from under her. And I am so glad we caught him. That's what divorce court is for. That is not the job of a title attorney. But I will tell you, any of you that are using a non-attorney title company for your transactions, these are the kinds of risks you run. And if not us, I would love it to be us, but if not us, we certainly would strongly encourage you to use a title attorney on your transactions so that you do not fall subject to fraud. It is rampant. Guess it's about time for another fraud webinar, which I'll do sometime soon. So the property cannot be transferred or mortgaged or otherwise impugned without the signature of both parties. So 3 meanings, this is where you might want to have your pen ready, for Florida, homestead in Florida. 1, exemption from forced sale. 2, restriction on transfer and devise. 3, a property tax exemption. I'm going to do them in that order, and I know most of us think about the property tax exemption when we speak of homestead, because that's what we see year after year after year, and therefore are thinking about it. So first is the exemption from forced sale. This protects a Florida homeowner's primary residence only. This is not for a rental property. This is not for a second home. This doesn't count the lake house. It has to be your homestead, your primary residence, from a forced sale by a creditor. For instance, if a court enters a money judgment against a Florida homeowner, the judgment creditor will not be able to satisfy that judgment with the person's homestead. In other words, they cannot force a foreclosure on the home in order to get paid. This protection is extremely strong and has worked under many dubious circumstances. One fairly recent one that you guys might remember is when O.J. Simpson moved to South Florida and purchased a mansion, and dumping a significant portion of his wealth into his then homestead in anticipation of the large civil judgment, which did subsequently occur. Even though everybody knew that he did that specifically to keep those assets away from the family, he was protected because of Florida homestead, and they were not allowed to collect against his home in South Florida, I believe Miami, and they had to look elsewhere to his assets to try to collect. So when we say dubious, You know, a good number of shysters have taken advantage of the homestead law. And it's those instances that make it look bad, even though it has a really good purpose. A little closer to home, I'm sitting not too far from Ponte Vedra Boulevard, and it's not too long ago that a commissioner of Major League Baseball took all of his assets and built a mansion on the boulevard, and then went through bankruptcy and got rid of all of his creditors because none of those creditors could collect against the house. He got to keep his house and wiped out his creditors. So that, I believe, has been redressed in the bankruptcy code. I do not and have not for over 30 years had a bankruptcy practice. So I don't believe one can do that with the bankruptcy code anymore. But even if he had not done that, those creditors would not have been able to collect against his homestead. Quick coffee break, or whatever is your morning juice of choice. All right. Second, the least known of the three is the restriction on transfer. As I mentioned before, this prevents a Florida homeowner from transferring his or her homestead property without the joinder or waiver of a spouse. As a title attorney, I can tell you that in 30 plus years of practice, we have always had joinder and not waiver. I'm sure waiver would work in specific instances, but I'm doubting a reputable title insurer is going to go down that road. So they have to join. That's the instance I just told you about a few minutes ago. And in addition, absent a proper waiver, a property must pass to the homeowner's surviving spouse following death, right? So for all of you that have fought, whined, complained, said bad things about me behind my back or any other title attorney, because that spouse does have to show up at the closing and sign, this is the reason why. It's required by Florida law. There is also, I want to add, a restriction on device for a Florida homeowner who dies survived by one or more minor children. This is very consistent with the original intent of homestead law to provide a home for the family and heirs or heirs of the homesteader, right? We're going to have a place for those kids to live and grow up. The restriction is absolute, and the homestead passes to the decedents, that's the dead person, minor children, by operation of law. All right. And those are designed to protect widows and orphans, but are often a trap for the unwary when it comes to estate planning and pose difficulties when dealing with homestead property during the administration of the decedent's estate, either through probate or through trust administration. So people often ask me, wow, isn't real estate and estate planning an odd combination of practices? Really, it isn't, because unless you know both those areas of law, there's a trap that is set for the unwary. Okay. So, and yes, I represent small business owners. I came up as a small business litigator, and I found that most of them are going to own some real property at some point in time, and every one of them, in addition to planning the future and the transfer or transition of their business, is going to need to have a plan in place for their family. Small business owners' family estate plan is just as important as their business plan and future succession planning. All right. So let's see. Yep, I already mentioned that the reason for this second and least known one is so that one member of a marriage cannot sell or mortgage without the other one knowing. This is why one member of a marriage cannot go and get a mortgage or a HELOC without the other one signing on, because really that equity is each of theirs equally. And so you don't want to let one person run up a big tab against it and the other one to lose their equity unknowingly. All right. And finally, yes, we're bringing it to the home stretch, and we're doing pretty well on time this morning. Surprise. I will say that we will have a few minutes at the end for questions if anybody wants to. There is a chat screen right here. Millie was kind enough to get that started this morning. I can see your questions there. When I finish, I will be absolutely delighted to answer those questions. Before I go on to the final one, I just thought I would share with you. Here is the Florida Homestead Act of 1862. I'm a history major. I just think stuff like that is so cool. I was born in 1960. You do the math. So 100 years almost before I was born, Florida was protecting homestead, and we continue to do so. We continue to do so now. That's a great question. There's some foreshadowing. I'll get to that after I finish this last part of the presentation. So, perhaps the most important to Florida homeowners is the property tax exemption and the related Save Our Homes law. This is what most people are talking about when they talk about homestead year in and year out. Okay, so the constitutional property tax exemption provides that the first $25,000 of a Florida homestead is exempt from all property taxes. That means you reduce the value, fair market value, and you don't pay taxes on that first 25 grand. An additional reduction of up to 25 applies if the home's worth at least 50,000. That's most everybody these days, right? So couples are typically getting a $50,000 reduction. The second exemption only applies to non-school taxes, right? So your millage is a little higher for schools. And I'll say thank you. I've got 2 school-age children, and they go to wonderful magnet schools here in Duval, and we appreciate all of us supporting the future of our state and of our country by educating these children. So the Save Our Homes law, try that again with different inflection. The Save Our Homes law cap begins when the county grants the initial exemptions and caps the increase in assessed value of homestead property to the lesser of the rate of inflation, or 3% per year. So otherwise said, the taxed value of your Florida homestead is never going to go up over 3% a year. For those people owning homes long-term in Florida, this is a huge tax benefit and really, really important that people pay attention to it. It's another whole course, but there is a concept called portability. I will let the cat out of the bag next month. We're just getting our location. It will be here at the beach. We are going to do portability and pours at the end of some fine workday, and pour a few drinks for you and talk about portability and what that means. Very, very briefly, it is the concept that any tax advantage you have gained in one Florida homestead, you may transfer some or all of it to your next Florida homestead. Okay, so more about that later. But historically, the appreciation of property values is rapidly growing in Florida and has outpaced the Save Our Homes cap. It's created significant property tax savings, again, for long-time homeowners. Homestead issues can be difficult to navigate. I highly recommend that anybody with questions contact a firm with attorneys who specialize in both real property and estate planning. Rock Solid Law is one of those firms. Obviously, I am not the only, we are not the only high quality lawyers in this area in town. If you're not going to work with us, please find somebody who really knows their stuff in this area, because it means money to you on the bottom line. I've said it all the time. We want our clients to pay the mandatory taxes to both Florida and to the United States. I'm a proud citizen of both, but I do not want our clients to pay voluntary taxes on top of that. If you don't know the tax code and you don't know the ways that you are entitled to credits against taxes, you're going to pay too much. And I would prefer to see my clients pass that on to those they love and treasure. All right. So before I get to questions, couple years ago, I wrote an article for the Jacksonville Bar Association on behalf of the real property and estate planning section on Homestead. I have basically simplified the article down to talk about exactly those things we have talked about today in a little two-pager called A Refresher on Florida Homestead Law. Any of you that would like to have that to be able to hand out to your clients, I am happy to provide it. I'm happy to co-brand it with you if you like. If you'll send me your logo, I'll put it on there with ours. The only thing I would ask is, since it's our work, if you would leave our logo on it as you hand it out. Again, that's a refresher on Florida homestead law. You all have listened here for this half an hour, so you're clearly experts on homestead law. We promise that each of you will be invited to come and have a drink with us and listen to me talk a little bit about portability. We are targeting early June. We have not yet reserved the space, although if you have done other events with us, you know a couple that we're very fond of. We're trying to arrange so it's outside, so those that still want to properly socially distance will be able to do so while we teach you a little bit about portability, maybe pour a glass of wine. I think the subtitle will be Jams and Gin, so you can have a gin if you prefer. And I'm probably going to hire a friend of mine to come play some music for us as well. So we'll have a good time and learn at the same time in June. Jams and Gin in June. Oh, I didn't think of that. Pretty good, huh? So you've certainly noticed me for the first time ever looking off to my right this morning. Our senior associate, Kathy Espinoza, has joined me this morning to keep me on track, and she's done a fine job, occasionally making a note as if I'd said something of import. I want to take questions now, and I see there's already one, and here's where the spectacles come into play. Can a prenup protect the home? The home is protected. I think that you're talking about, can it protect against the proposed spouse, the person you're going to get married to? Yeah, you can. You can make arrangements with respect to the homestead in a prenuptial agreement. I guess that will take a segue to me of three people who can collect against homestead. And I'm sure you guessed the first of them, the IRS, right? So we cannot protect our home against legitimate debts to the country, to the Internal Revenue Service. The second one that's obvious to everybody is to any bank that you borrowed money from to buy the house. And that's called a mortgage. And if they collect on the note, which is secured by the mortgage, that is called a foreclosure. The third category of people who can collect against a homestead are people to whom you gave the right to do so or who receive it under statute. The folks under statute are basically people you hire to do work on your house, thus the notice of commencement, and that actually perfects a lien against the property. If you don't pay those people that you hire to work on your house, then they can actually foreclose that lien. And that additionally would include a homeowners or a condominium association, because they have a lien right granted against your property as well. So those are the few people that can collect against a Florida homestead, despite the exemptions. So yes, a prenup can protect a home. It needs to be properly drafted. That is not in our area of expertise, but we, of course, work closely with attorneys who do prepare them on a regular basis, and would be delighted to assist you with finding a quality attorney to do that. I am not seeing other questions posed at this point in time. I'll give you another minute to ask one, and then I think I'm going out with the Rolling Stones today rather than our usual Commodores. Does that sound good to you guys, or you want Commodores? Anybody who wants to pose a request can, or you can go play it on your own computer. Stones! There you go. Thank you, Paula. Excellent choice. Here is Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Charlie Watts, Bill Wyman was on this one, and that's Brian Jones playing the harmonica. We'll be back next week to do this all over again. And as usual, my piece of paper over here is buried that tells me what we're going to talk about. Oh, it's a good one. For those of you in business particularly, LLCs 101. Stop screwing up your business life. I'm going to enjoy teaching that one next week. We're going to talk about what's important about the care and feeding and formation of an LLC in Florida. Guys, I go back to a time before LLCs were statutorily allowed in Florida. So I've got a little bit of history to work with on this one. Thank you guys so much. Oh, you're so welcome. Oh, it's questions at Rock Solid Law. Questions at Rock Solid Law. If you want to get a copy of that article. And I do see some people have written in. First off, Dina, you're welcome. Good to see you online this morning. And I do have another question. So, Nick, I'm going to have to quiet you down just a little bit. Let's hit this one. Thank you, Ken. When buying a home in Duval County, will the homestead tax benefit transfer automatically? No. No, it will not. And first off, you'll have to properly file and be granted your new homestead, and then you have to apply for portability and port that old one over. There is a portability webinar at rocksolidlaw.com/videos, and I highly recommend you take the 20-30 minutes to check that one out because it's going to help you in that search. There is also, folks, a portability calculator on our website under the real estate tab. Just scroll down. I think it's the second aqua oval or teal oval down. Go play with that a little bit. It'll show you how portability works. It's especially important to use the calculator if your new home had a lower fair market value than your old home. If you're upsizing or buying a more expensive home, you will get 100% of your tax benefit up to $500,000. That's the quick answer to that. Check that portability webinar out, and if there are follow-up questions at Rock Solid Law. Okay, I got to share this one. Great job. Love the info. My first time. We'll be back. Glad to have you. So glad to have you. We started these during the pandemic when I couldn't do live workshops anymore. And even though we're going back to live workshops, I just love spending a half an hour on Thursday mornings sharing what I've spent my life learning about. All right, you guys, I'm going to let you listen to Mick for another minute. I'm John Miller, Rock Solid Law. Hope to see you soon.